The Weight of the Scale by Cody Zellers. The butcher shop had been in the family for many years. The rain-sanded sign above the front door bore the Hoff name. Its once red letters now a light pink, the wood of the board reasserting itself through the stamp of ownership. Hoff's Butcher. In this world unto itself, this insular town, placards, advertisements didn't need to be repainted. Everyone knew who you were, where you could be found, and what type of person you were. Inside, under a nicotine-toned black and white photograph of the shop on opening day, was Carl Hoff. He stood behind the white-rounded glass-faced display cabinet where he had been dutifully installed since his father's death. He also stood on the Hoff migratory path, a path worn light yellow in the dark brown floorboards, the route described by necessity, from display case to scale to roll of waxy paper to twine to register. The T-bone pattern faded into the cutting room behind, into the cool, dark, and coppery blood smell. Carl placed Mrs. Schulman's order into the cleaver-chiseled groove of a disused butcher block. He wiped his hands on the side of his undersized apron. The man was stout and ruddy. A thin, pale butcher would be suspect. His round, rump-roast head was seasoned with a salt and pepper crew cut. On the other side of the counter was Mrs. Nordonsky. She ordered her weekly assortment. Carl regarded the elderly woman, her familiar pinched nose and sallow cheeks, a sign of stinginess, he thought. She was also born in Philadelphia, so naturally was a snob. He had been lost in his assessment of her, so busy with his habit of scrutiny that he didn't notice his mistake until after she had gone. To the left of the register, under the roll of glossy white paper that hung from the ceiling, was the scale. It was shaped like a flattened funnel, spout pointing down. Between the dial that assigned a numeric value to the meat and the cast iron crossbeam was a polished stainless steel tray. The glass face at the top of the wide enamel instrument had a black background with white numbers. The needle was red. The fixture was, even more than the cash register, the objective conscience of the store. The tray was empty, but the needle pointed to 1/4 of a pound. Carl had unknowingly cheated Mrs. Nordonsky. He rubbed his most dominant chin. The rubbery mounds of his brow and cheek squeezed the blue eyes between them as he squinted at the dial to be sure. A squeak or some muffled squelch nearby distracted him. Carl scanned the countertop intently. Vermin of any kind were the bane of his profession, an ancestral enemy. He kept his body still, swiveling only his head so as not to scare into hiding the imagined rodent. The wet burbling sound came again. It was coming from underneath or inside Miss Schulman's meat order. Carl pounded his fat-gloved fist down on the bundle. He hovered it above for a moment while he checked for any sound or movement. There was none. He unclenched the poised pink tenderizer and lifted the packet. Nothing was underneath. Carl unwrapped the bundle. There was no flattened mouse inside, just Schulman's ribeye. The saucer-sized slab was shaped like a puffy comma. It was surrounded by a thick ribbon of yellowish fat, the face of it marbled with streaks. Its prevailing feature was a circle of blood-tinted bone. A 2-inch slit in the encircling fat had opened, separating it from the wet crimson meat like a thick lower lip. Its resemblance to a mouth struck Carl, who was unaccustomed to seeing anything but indicators of quality or age in his produce. The ribeye vaguely brought to mind a tilted, one-eyed face. He wrapped it back up, but for some reason couldn't bring himself to put it in the freezer. Carl closed the shop at the usual time. This was an unconscious ritual that demanded not a single new thought. He went upstairs to his empty apartment. He lived alone, never having met a grade A woman to marry. In Carl's grandfather's time, locals would bring live animals in for butchering. The back door opened to a small yard where the livestock were prepared. Old Man Hoff was known for his adroit business eye, a phrase often spoken by a sodbuster or townie with a crate full of clucking hens to be sold was, "How about it? Are they up to snuff enough? Or is it Hoff with their heads?" Those times had passed, but the Hoff's family's ability to size up the value of a cow's hide or a man's heart had retained its bone knife edge. The shop had comfortably filled its niche in the little town's food chain for almost 90 years. The next morning, Carl opened as always. The light coming through the big storefront windows described the exact rectangles on the proper part of the wall for the precise time of the day of that year. Carl noticed this for the first time in a long time. Can sunlight be golden? He wondered. His mind quickly returned to Schulman's spoiled ribeye. He didn't know why, but he was reluctant to throw it out. A customer came in before the pendulum swinging of the just flipped open sign had ceased. Carl checked off the man's statistics with ingrained precision. Donald Hale, wide-set eyes. That means there's insanity in the family. He was short and stocky, therefore slow-witted, lazy. Donald asked for a prime cut of sirloin, and Carl told him it was coming right up. The butcher passed the ribeye on the way to the cutting room. It was uncovered. He remembered rewrapping it the night before. His stomach tightened at the sight of its slick, graying surface. This was odd to him. The sight of rotting meat had never bothered him before. Donald reeled off some facts about something he was learning in night school. Carl grunted pre-recorded encouragements. He weighed the sirloin, wrapped it, avoided looking at the ribeye. He could smell it, rang up the meat. Donald Hale left while Carl held onto the edge of the counter, smiling but thinking of the ribeye. His grip on the counter's edge was as tight as a man's hanging from a building's ledge. "Look at me," said the ribeye. Carl knew it was the ribeye. He didn't have to look. Its tiny flap of fat was forming words now. He wouldn't watch.